Good morning. My name is Carl Wayne. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Good Planning here at UC Berkeley. I'll be your MC today. We're gathered here today to reconnect with each other, to explore what can be due to build a bridge toward those we disagree with and get a taste of what's happening on campus from Chancellor Alliance. We're also here to say thank you. Thank you for choosing to spend your day with us, for your meaningful gifts and participation in the Benjamin I. Wheeler Legacy Society, and for making Berkeley's dream possible for so many. By working with great philanthropists and visionaries in the early 20th century, Benjamin I. Wheeler, after whom the society is named, transferred Berkeley from a small Western university to one of the most distinguished centers of learning in the world. And he also arranged UC's very first estate gift, which led to our most treasured landmark, which is the Campanile that you could probably see through the window there. Isn't this a gorgeous day? I mean, it's just really a beautiful day. So anyway, since January of 2024, over 72,500 donors have contributed over $1.4 billion to Berkeley. And that's without a public campaign to drive us, and especially during the very challenging times that we live in now. And so it's an extraordinary testament to the commitment of individuals like you in the room today. And so this total counts toward the next campaign, which we are currently in planning for, and will announce in the next year or so. And because of the foresight and generosity of Wheeler Society members, of that $1.4 billion that I mentioned, $74 million of that is from realized estates where individuals have chosen to include UC Berkeley in their estate, either through their will or trust. And $20 million is from life income gifts like charitable remainder trusts and charitable gift annuities. And $88 million is from new estate commitments received in the last year and a half. So your support plays a crucial role in ensuring the fiscal foundation for generations to come. So thank you for being part and continuing an extraordinary tradition of giving to Berkeley. So please give yourselves a rousing round of applause. So now I'd like to introduce today's featured faculty speaker. John Powell is an internationally recognized expert in the areas of civil rights, civil liberties, structural racism, housing, poverty, and democracy. He directs Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute, which unites scholars, community advocates, communicators, and policymakers in working toward a more inclusive, just, and sustainable society. He holds the Robert D. Haas Chancellor's Chair in Equity and Inclusion and is a professor of law, African American, and ethnic studies. John has also held research, leadership, and teaching roles at other universities, including Ohio State University, the University of Minnesota, Harvard University, and Columbia. He was a national legal director of the ACLU and co-founded the Poverty and Race Research Action Council. His latest books are Belonging Without Othering, How We Save Ourselves and the World, and The Power of Bridging, How to Build a World Where We All Belong. So at the end of John's talk, which will go into about 11:45, we will have the opportunity for a Q&A session with him. And so there are cards and pencils at your table. So if you'd like to write a question, someone from the staff here will collect it, and then we'll pepper John with those questions. So please join me in welcoming John, who will discuss how to build greater belonging in a world that seems so polarized.
Thank you, Carl, and thank all of you for supporting Berkeley. Like many of you, but not all of you, I'm an alum of Berkeley, so it's great to be back here in a slightly different role. So I'm going to be talking to you about belonging and othering, and I know those are probably wonky terms. Most of you probably don't use those terms, but I'm suggesting that really what's going on in the world is a reach for belonging, that all of us need to belong. Once we start looking at it, it's something that's fundamental to our thriving as individuals and as society. And yet, the world is actually experiencing something different. It's experiencing more othering. And othering is a process where we say to people, you don't fully belong. There's something wrong with you. You're not part of this society, this community, this neighborhood. And at the extreme, it can actually result in violence and even genocide. So othering happening in such a powerful way, my mic is cutting on and off, but all around the world. So what I want to suggest is that the problem we're facing in the United States and in the world is the problem of othering. And it can take on many different forms. Othering is a social construct. It's not natural, it's not inevitable. And when it takes on its different forms, we hear it in terms of racism, sexism, anti-immigration, religious, ageism. We make stuff up. But once we make it up and give it a story and give it legs, it seems natural, it seems inevitable. It's not. Because it's social, it means we can change it. We're actually constructing it so we can deconstruct it. So why is this happening? Why is it happening now as such a powerful expression? And one of the reasons is change. Rapid change creates anxiety, not just in humans, but in other mammals. And there's an old saying, which I think has some truth to it, that if you change your job, where you live, and your primary relationship, within a 2-year period, your chance of having a heart attack goes up 50%. And that's assuming that their new relationship is a good one. If it's a bad relationship, you're done. And so what's happening in the world, not just in the United States, not just in California, not just in the Bay Area, what's happening in the world is change is happening very fast. And in some sense, it's like we're out of control. And you can have your own list of things, but think about it. We just dealt with the pandemic, climate change. Every year now in California, we're worried about fires, technology. I just saw a podcast where they're talking about young people, primary relationship being with an AI. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a thing, and we don't know how to think about it. And so all this change, and this change is speeding up, in some ways it's stressing our very core. And so one way we make sense of this change is through stories. Stories help us. Stories is a process of collective sense-making and collective meaning. Sometimes we can agree on facts, sometimes we can't. But even when we agree on facts, there's a question is, what does it mean? And stories help give us that answer. And leaders play an oversized role in those stories. We look to others. We look to sense makers. We look to influencers. We look to our ministers, our priests, our rabbis, to help us make sense of the world. And right now, there are 2 types of stories. One story is what I called a bridging story. And a bridging story says, yes, the world is changing, but you know what? We're all going to be okay. We can tell a story about a larger and larger we. We can tell a story about us becoming more diverse. We can tell a story about a new set of possibilities. Some people believe that is the secret sauce to Homo sapiens. That Homo sapiens developed the capacity to tell stories, to create large communities, when the other humans, Neanderthals and others, stayed in small tribes, because they didn't have a story uniting them. I could say more about that, but I don't have time. The point is that the ability to cooperate is really an incredible, not just human trait, but Homo sapien trait that we sometimes underutilize. That's bridging. We call that bridging, and that's the title of one of the books that Carl mentioned. The other story is a story about fear. It's a story that those people, you don't feel good? Look at that guy next to you. It's his fault. He's the reason that you feel anxious. He's trying to take you can put in whatever you want to, your partner, your neighborhood, your religion, and so we tell a story about fear, and the fear becomes weaponized, and the other plays an oversized role in that fear. So those are the two types of stories. Bridging stories, where we bring people together and cooperate, and breaking stories, where we create smaller and smaller we's, and people who are not part of our we becomes a threat. These are not just stories about people, they're also stories about institutions. So we learn not to trust each other. We learn to be afraid of the future. And that's why when we tell breaking stories, we oftentimes resort to an imaginary past that never was and never will be. So these breaking stories literally break our trust in each other, redefine us, and break our trust in institutions. And when you have these cracks, these breaks in society, the anxiety becomes even greater. We start believing anything. So what is the response to this othering that's going on? And I oftentimes say it's not saming, which is sometimes a liberal impulse to just say, we're all exactly the same. It's a nice idea, even though it's not true. And it's not necessary. We're not the same. We may share some deep human traits. We may develop new traits that we share. But we do all belong. And so what we say is that belonging is the answer to othering. And it's in some ways already baked into many of our founding principles and founding ideals. We haven't fully lived it, and we may never fully live it. But it's what some philosopher calls a regulative ideal. It's something for us to strive for. And I would say one of the great things about Berkeley, this university, is the fact that it creates a community where everybody belongs. Bring who you are and be part of this great institution. There's a General Stanley McChrystal, who led the United States efforts in Afghanistan. He wrote a really powerful piece that I'd recommend to you, but he titled his piece, Be Not Afraid. And what he's saying in that piece is that the fear that we're experiencing, the anxiety that we're experiencing, is not natural. It's being manufactured. We're being encouraged to be afraid of each other. We're told to be afraid of each other. And so he's saying, don't be afraid. Nice idea, but it's not quite right. I would say, in this world, it's okay to be afraid. In fact, it may be important to be afraid, but we don't need to be paralyzed by fear. We don't need to give fear the keys to the car. And in fact, I would say the Reverend Dr. King, and we're in the Reverend Dr. King's space right now, his response to fear was courage. But notice this, and it's an interesting turn. Courage requires fear. If you have no fear, you can't have courage. So it's not that we say we don't have fear. There are things to be afraid of. There's things to be worried about. But can we meet it with courage, not with our heads in the sand? King also said, the arc of the universe bends toward justice. The moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. It's long. It may take a long time, but it's bending toward justice. And this is a rendition of that. I say, what's really going on is that the moral arc of the universe may bend toward justice if we bend it toward justice. It's not a mechanical thing. It's not something we can sit back and just watch happen. We participate in it. And because we participate in it, because it's a social construct, there are those who can bend it away from justice. It can bend toward justice, or it can bend away from justice. And if you look at it carefully, and I do this in one of the books, Belonging Without Othering, that I wrote with Stephen Menendian, human history, in many ways, is a history of people moving to greater and greater belonging. Not without setbacks, not without stops, but we've been creating more and more communities with varied people. And the very Constitution, both in the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment, both promises due process. Now, most of you probably are not lawyers and don't want to be, but what due process represents is recognizing everyone's humanity. Everyone. And it's interesting, that's in our Constitution. And it doesn't say that citizens should get due process. It doesn't say a certain race should get due process. It doesn't say a certain gender. It says everyone, not just citizens, but every human being is entitled to due process under our Constitution. What does that mean? Among other things, it means that if someone charges you of something, if someone wrongs you, there should be someone you can tell your story to, an impartial judge. And that may seem like a small thing, but it's huge. So bridging is about turning toward each other. Breaking is about turning on each other. So again, as the general said, the fear that we're experiencing is not natural. We have what we call conflict entrepreneurs, people who trade in conflict, people who like for there to be a scary world. And they're good at it. And they stir up anxiety and fear that we have. And we know some of those people. They're all over the world. The Greeks talked about demagogues and to be afraid of demagogues. Now, I talked about bridging. So how do we connect with someone who is apparently different than us? And I say apparent because, remember, in many ways, the story of difference is just that, a story. There's a former dean of Harvard who wrote a book called What Difference Does a Difference Make? So differences aren't natural. We give meaning to them. And when those differences become crystallized, we need to have bridges to talk to each other, to understand each other. And there are what I call short bridges and long bridges. And a short bridge is where you disagree with someone, maybe your cousin, your sister, your uncle, but you actually have a lot in common that you know. You have the same language, maybe the same religion, the same food. You have friends in common, you have family in common. Still, you may have disagreements, but there's a lot there to work with. Those are called short bridges. What's a long bridge? A long bridge is when you can't imagine even being in the same room, in the same neighborhood with someone. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a minister about bridging, the need to sort of connect with each other, people who are apparently different. And he said, John, are you suggesting as a Christian minister, I bridged with the devil? His name was McBride. And I said, Pastor McBride, don't start there. But also be careful who you call the devil. So when we think about bridging, when we think about reaching beyond the people that we see every day, reaching beyond our narrow group, don't start with the most difficult. Start with something easier. I say, if you've been sitting on the couch for 6 months watching television or however you spend your time, and you decide, okay, I'm going to run, and given that many of you are probably a similar age cohort as I am, you might decide to walk a marathon, or you might decide to see a marathon. But my point is that if you've been sitting on the couch for 6 months, don't go out tomorrow and try to do 13 miles. take a walk around the block, and then take 2 walks around the block. Start off small, start off with something immediate, and then as you get comfortable with it, take it to a further step. So I said earlier that leaders are really important in terms of constructing these stories. Are they telling bridging stories or breaking stories? All of you in some way are obviously leaders. But also what leaders are really good at is listening. And when we celebrate the tremendous leadership of the Reverend Dr. King and his oratory skills, but most of us don't realize what a profound listener he was. And he made an art of it. And that's one of the things that's called for if you want to bridge. So who is the other? Is it being anti-Black, Asian? And again, as I suggested, there is no natural other. I'm going to take a quick turn here and talk a little bit about Aristotle. I know in the advertisement, all of you, if you read the fine print, it said Professor Powell is going to give a lecture on Aristotle. Actually didn't say that. But we talk about Aristotle all the time, and yet we don't realize that. We, meaning people in the United States and the West, get most of our concept of equality, they actually are diffuse, they come from all over. But Aristotle plays an oversized role. And Aristotle said this about equality. He said, I'm paraphrasing, fairness and justice requires that when people are situated the same, you treat them the same. Treat people the same who are situated the same. And he said, he referred to that as arithmetic equality. Treat people the same who are situated the same. But he then went on to say, justice and fairness requires when people who are situated differently, you treat them differently. He called that geometric equality. And he said a healthy society has a proper measure of both. We sometimes forget that. Sometimes we say equality just means treat everybody the same. Well, that doesn't make sense. I have 3 children. One of them has strep throat. I go to the doctor and get medicine. I don't come home and divide the medicine between the 3 children. They're not situated the same. So you need both. Treating people who are the same, who are situated the same, treating people differently, who are situated differently. I call that targeted universalism. And some of the fights we're having now about equality, about campus, and otherwise, gets wrapped up without being informed by Aristotle. Should I treat everybody the same? No. Should I treat everybody different? No. It really depends on how people are situated. So again, I call that targeted universalism, and that informs my work. But the goal of targeted universalism is to get everyone to that ultimate goal. It's not picking one group over the other group. It's saying everyone deserves dignity and respect, and people need different things. If the container is cracked, and it is, it means we have to not just repair the container, but have to create a container that holds all of us. So when is it appropriate and fair to treat people the same? When is it appropriate and fair to treat people differently? So this is a little slide of, let's say the goal is for people to watch the game. You could say we give everyone a box. After giving, we're going to give everyone exactly the same box. But you notice that on the left-hand side, it means that the person in a wheelchair still can't see the game, can't use the box. The box doesn't help that person. And then on the slide on the right, you see that one person didn't need a box at all to see over the fence. Another person needed a box, and another person needed something completely different. The goal was the same. It was not picking one person over the other, saying, what does this person need to actually thrive? It may be different than what that other person needs. Again, that's targeted universalism. And it's a way of talking about programs as well as a practice. So when we think about the university or society as to why certain people might get something that others are not, can we actually talk about it in terms of not their race, not their gender, but their situatedness? The goals are universal. The strategies are targeted. The goals are universal. The strategies are targeted. How do we make sure that everyone in here and your family has a healthy life? That's the universal. But how we achieve that will be different for different groups. We're at this incredible educational institution. So what is the role of education? Well, the obvious thing is to educate. Excuse me. But I want to say it's also about collective meaning making and collective sense making. It's to help bring these diverse people, diverse experiences together and to create something out of it. Sometimes when we are struggling with things, we say, let's remove the barriers. And while that's important, I think it's not enough. We're not just removing barriers. We're actually creating. We're creating something new. We're designing something. And belonging, unlike inclusion, say that we co-create. I don't create for you, you don't create for me, we co-create together. And we also realize that structures do work. Structures are not neutral. So if you just say, let's remove the barriers, the goal then is to be in a neutral space. But I don't think that's the goal. We have a more proactive space. Sometime in the context of education and other, we say we want to create a safe space. Again, I think that's the wrong goal. I say, great students, we have fantastic students, but they don't come to Berkeley to take a nap. They come here to learn, they come here to be stretched, they come here to investigate. So we need not complete comfort, but also not complete panic. We don't want to traumatize students, faculty, or staff, but we want to challenge constructively. And again, we're moving toward belonging, where they get to co-create the world that they're in, which means to me and to us, co-creation means they're not coming here to find an institution that's already set. Their very involvement will change Berkeley, necessarily. So I talked about stories. So who are we talking to in these stories? Who's the audience? It's important to always know your audience. And I want to suggest that when you're in a heightened state of fear, your audience is the lizard. So who is the lizard? And I won't go into it now, but I don't have time. But think fast and slow, Kahneman's book. There's part of the brain, front of the brain, the newest part of the brain, prefrontal cortex, which is the new kid on the block. That's where logic and reason happening. And we try to talk to that part of the brain a lot here at Berkeley. But there's another part of the brain called the amygdala, which organizes most of our emotions in fear. When we're in fear, the prefrontal cortex is offline. When we're dealing with fear, you got to talk to the lizard. We call it the lizard because it's the part of the brain we share with the lizard. So when we're deeply afraid, what's the language of the lizard? And as great as Berkeley is, I think we don't spend enough time teaching students how to talk to the lizard. The lizard organizes around fear. So we talk to the lizard not simply by facts and data, but by stories, by feelings. Speaking of stories, this famous Jamaican philosopher, Bob Marley, he says every person thinks his burden is the heaviest. So I know my stories, but I don't know your stories. So part of it is to create a space where we can listen to each other, where we can hear each other's stories. But there's more than one kind of listening. There's the analytical listening, the prefrontal cortex, the ego. It's like, I'm listening for mistakes. I'm listening for analysis. You got the date wrong. There's a flaw in your logic. That's important. But that's not what we talk about when we talk about bridging. Bridging is talking about listening from the heart. What does it feel like? What is your experience like? So I think in terms of creating a world where everybody belongs, part of it is creating a world where people's stories can be heard. And I'll end by this. What is the lizard so afraid of? Not belonging, not being seen. And so part of the language to the lizard, part of the listening to the lizard, is to listen to the stories in a way that they feel belong. Thank you.
So here's a question. Since forever there has been an inclination toward tribalism, it seems ingrained or even genetic. How do you get past this?
Well, it's a great question, and it's a question that comes up a lot, and therefore, we devote, I think, a whole chapter to it in the book. So there's a debate, and the debate is not settled, but probably, it certainly is not genetic. It's certainly not inevitable. And there's a long answer and a short answer, so I'll give you the medium answer. Tribe is actually the wrong term. Tribes were normally bands of people who, or I should say hunter-gatherers, hung out with each other in their whole life. They were anywhere from 50 to 200. And something happened, which I alluded to earlier, where we started having much larger collections of people, not hundreds, but thousands. And what held those people together were stories. So hunter-gatherers were held together by daily experience and daily contact. So between 50 and 200 people. That was it, no more, right? That's the people you see every day. So when we talk about being Americans, 330 million people, we're not talking about a tribe. When we talk about 2.5 billion people, 2.5 billion people organized around the faith of Christianity, that's not a tribe. Those people, many people will never see each other, speak a different language, and yet they're being held together. What's holding them together? And Harari, in his book *Sapien*, talks about this. What's holding them together is a story. Now, my father was a Christian minister, and he would take umbrage of calling Christianity a story. But the point is that there's something symbolic. And McMahon says that we're on this biological determinism, which is what the question implies, and the ability to tell stories created a break. We can now do things that was unimaginable. So we're not constrained, at least not completely, by our biology. We have the capacity to create. Part of that capacity is the capacity in stories. And again, Harari and others argue that what made humans so special, not humans really, sapiens, was our ability to collaborate with thousands of people. They're still trying to figure out, how did people build the pyramids without advanced tools? And what some historians say is that it was early algorithms. You really complicated relationships where people could cooperate, and when people cooperate, we can do amazing things. What's the limit of that? We don't know. So no, I don't think we're trapped into tribalism. If we were, we'd still be in bands of 100 to 200 people.
Thank you. Here's another question for you. So how do you deal with people who believe that equity and equality are really unequal and inequality?
So a great question. I'm in the process of writing a new book, and it's on the Enlightenment, which may seem like, people, when people say something is academic and they're not at an institution like Berkeley, it's usually a slam. It's like, well, that's academic. It's like, meaning that it's irrelevant and no one cares. So writing about the Enlightenment may seem like the height of academia. It's like, who cares? And yet, we're writing a book with Stephen Menendia. We're starting a book, although it may change, talking about the Dark Enlightenment. And the Dark Enlightenment is there a group of people who don't believe in equality at all. They say it. There are people like Peter Thiel, and this is not his, you're going to look him up, he's PayPal. He says, democracy and freedom can't coexist. And he would choose freedom over democracy. So he's anti-democratic. So there's some people who not only don't believe in equity, they don't believe in human dignity. They don't believe that we're all equal. Now, I wouldn't engage with those people. I'm engaged with them in this book, but I think most Americans and most people in the world do believe in human dignity. But the nuance of it is complicated. And I would at least begin, as I did here, to say, what did Aristotle mean by equality? And really, however you define equality, I acknowledge that you as a human being matter, that you count. We don't have to agree on everything, but I think we can maybe begin to agree that I value you and hopefully you value me. So that's partially how I talk about it. So bridging is not based on agreeing at every level. It's a radical acceptance of our shared humanity, even where we disagree. Now, many of us are in long-term relationships, and despite disagreements, you may still hang out with your partner. You know, say, get out. We disagree. There's a line by a Canadian philosopher named Leonard Cohen. He says, you who leave everything that you cannot control, it begins with your family, but then it comes around to your soul. So he's saying that our ability to get along is not based on agreement, it's based on something else. And we would say it may be based on care, maybe based on love. Love doesn't require complete agreement. Many of us have children that we don't completely agree with, but we still manage, in most cases, to love them.
Here's an interesting question. What have you learned lately, and what do you want to learn next?
Well, I'm watching children, and I'm watching them develop into wanting beings. You know, little children, so I'm playing a little bit with Freud's concept, the oceanic feeling. There's a debate, and this may be really academic, right? So I hope that's okay, Chancellor Lyons. But so Freud and Jung are arguing. The argument goes something like this: is there such a thing as oceanic feelings? Are oceanic feelings real? And what they mean by that, basically, is that when the fetus is in the womb, all of its apparent wants or pre-wants are satisfied, more or less. It doesn't know hunger. It doesn't know cold. It doesn't know, everything is taken care of. It's completely, the story is it's warm, it's comfortable, it's constantly being fed. That's the oceanic feeling. So both Freud and Jung agree that there probably is such a thing as oceanic feeling, which is pre-consciousness, pre-feelings in some ways. And Freud's thing is that it's infantile. We can't get back there. We should drop that. And he writes about it a lot in terms of some of his other things. And it's an analogous in some ways to the Garden of Eden, right? Think of the Garden of Eden. The story of the Garden of Eden is that everything was pretty cool. It wasn't cold. We didn't have to wear clothes. Didn't have to have sex. Maybe that was. But the point is, can we get back there? And Freud says no. Jung says not only can we get back there, that the oceanic feeling is a prototype of spirituality. And what spirituality entails is that oceanic feeling with consciousness, right? Because anyway, so that's one of the things I've been playing with. It's like, is there oceanic feeling? Can we get back there? Can we be conscious beings? Which you think again about the Garden of Eden. As I said, my father was a Christian minister. The Garden of Eden seems to be, once humans were conscious, they're kicked out of the garden, right? Before they were conscious, they were just enjoying. Some people say, so what I'm hoping to learn though, I don't know if learning is the right word, I'll just say this. You know, I know that I don't have much longer here. I think that most of my life has already been lived. And I really want to embody what I'm talking about, but also leave something for the world, my children, my grandchildren, and your children and grandchildren. So I really want to figure out, is there a way of coming up with something so that this resonates with people? I want to be able to talk to people about this in such a way that it resonates to them. It's not just academic. They can experience as a lived experience and as a aspiration to organize around.
Thank you. So here's a question about action. So what are 3 simple actions we can do today within our community to create bridging, belonging with those who are fostering inequality?
So we are doing something which you might want to consider. We're creating we have a project called the Long Bridging Project, where we actually bring people together in a curated way to engage with each other. And we're doing it in several different venues. And so far, still early on, maybe 2 or 3 years in, it's been incredibly successful on one level. And I can't say a whole lot about this, but I will say this. Part of that involves bringing Republicans and Democrats together in DC who work in the Senate. So these are powerful people who make a practice of attacking each other publicly. And we bring them together, and we brought a lot of them together, and we share a number of dinners and have a speaker and then have them engage with each other. Part of the deal, though, is that we're not to say much about it in public. So I can't go into it in great detail. But part of it is can you, I would go back to that circle, can you step out of your comfort zone, not into the panic zone? We're not asking you to do something that's, way beyond your count, and just engage. Can you practice listening from the heart to people you don't agree with? There's a practice called looping, which is where you say something, someone says something, and then you loop it back to them. What I hear you saying is, and I said, no, you didn't get it. And you keep doing it until they say, that's exactly it. And it's not just the words. It's listening with the heart. It's listening, being present. And the research on this is actually quite profound. When you can deeply listen, Charles Taylor calls it the politics of recognition. He's saying that a lot of politics, what people call identity politics, is really simply about being seen. Not being right, not necessarily winning, but really being seen. So can we actually engage in something for people who we don't necessarily see every day, or people who we don't necessarily agree with, to create a space where there's some looping and there's some seeing? So those are some of the things I would encourage us to play with.
So here's the last question, and I have to set this up with this statement. So as many of us know, many unpredictable and fast-moving federal actions are threatening to undermine the very foundations upon which America's universities are built. At Berkeley, the harmful effects of these actions include the elimination of some research grants and an unknown future for our international, undocumented, and other student communities. So here's the question. What can our Wheeler Society members do to help protect Berkeley's capacity to teach, learn, and discover? And what can our donors do to preserve Berkeley's pursuit to embody a place where all are welcome and belong here?
That's a great question. And, with all these questions, this is true, but this is especially true with this last question. It's really something can't be answered adequately in 30 seconds or even a minute. And so, and yet I think it really is an important question. So I would say, first of all, that to the extent that you and Chancellor and others want to dig more deeply in that, I, myself, and my institute will make ourselves available. I think that's an incredibly important question. I would enlarge it in 2 respects. I think the threat to our society, to the world, is larger than the university, it's larger than housing, it's larger than immigration. And that's one reason I'm starting this book off with the Dark Enlightenment. In the past, people have disagreed about the best way to do something. What's the best way to educate students? Educators will disagree. What's the best way to provide health care? Private, public, universal? People disagree. People disagreed oftentimes in terms of method. But there were some fundamental agreements that were sacrosanct, such as we care about a democracy. And in a democracy, you win, lose, or draw. You could say this is fair, this is not fair, gerrymandering or whatever. But fundamentally, there's something that we share, both historically and in the future. That's not true today. So when you say to Peter Thiel, you are destroying democracy, he would say, good. Democracy is bad. When literally, and I teach this, when you say, what do we mean by equality? They are very powerful people, not philosophers, not professors, billionaires, who are saying, this equality BS, we need to drop it. There are people who are saying, the richest person on the planet, Elon Musk, says empathy is destroying Western civilization. To care about others is destroying Western civilization. So that's the environment we're in. Now, we have different roles. You have a role here, Wheeler. So I would say, how do you link arms, first of all, with each other? And just really appreciate how deep this threat is. And what we might do both in terms of preserving the things that you worked so long to create, but also what's next. The world is going to look different, even regardless of what happens in the next election. So how do you get ahead of it? So I think that there are really several questions in that, but the threat is, to me, really quite profound. It's not a fight between, think of John McCain and Barack Obama when they're running for president. They had profound respect for each other. They had many shared values. They didn't want to jail their opponent. Neither one was saying the Constitution doesn't matter. And yet you have very powerful people saying the only thing that really matters now is loyalty and power. So we're in a different kind of environment. But I also think, and I'll end by saying this, in this environment is one other thing. I went to school, before I came to Berkeley, I went to a different school down the bay called Stanford with a young man named Mitt Romney, who later became the governor of Massachusetts and senator. He's a Republican, I'm not. I have a lot of respect for Mitt Romney. I knew his family, I knew his father, George Romney. Mitt Romney said, and this is, his father was the president of American Motors Company. So he's money, connections, white, powerful. He said, I'm afraid. He said, I have an exit plan for my family because I don't know where the country is going. This is one of the most powerful people in the world, saying he's afraid. That's why I said, we got to deal with this. We got to deal with it at different levels. So I don't think there's a simple answer, but the kind of terrorism, the kind of fear, the kind of the sweeping the country, I think is profound. And I think to create some space to think about that and to project a new story, a story where we all belong, a story where we're all cared about, a story where we can participate in the story ourselves, is the project of the Institute. And so our moonshot is, it's been 15 years to create a world where the global norm is belonging without othering. Can we create a world where everyone belongs? Once you look at history, efforts of belonging has been there everywhere. Christianity, Islam, nation states, but it's always belonging with othering. My group belongs, your group does not belong. Can we move beyond that to an aspiration? So I think we have to preserve what's here, but also explore a positive story and engage with some of the changes that are inevitable. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for spending the afternoon with us. We appreciate your remarks. So now we're going to enjoy lunch, and then after lunch, we'll hear remarks from Chancellor Lyons and an opportunity to have a Q&A with him. So let's enjoy lunch. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed your delicious lunch and good conversation. Seems like we have a lot of good conversation going on here at the tables. So I'd like to invite Chancellor Rich Lyons to the podium. So no stranger to most of us, Chancellor Lyons just completed his first year as the 12th Chancellor. Prior to that, he was the Associate Vice Chancellor for Innovation and Entrepreneurship from 2020 to 2024, and the Dean of the Haas Business School from 2008 to 2018. As an alum himself and a contributor, Chancellor Lyons delights in meeting alums and working together to steward this remarkable university. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Lyons to the stage to share what's happening on campus. And if you have any questions at the end of his remarks, we'll have about a 20-minute Q&A session with him. So welcome, Chancellor Lyons.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you especially to all of you. Some of you heard me say this before. Our Berkeley is one of society's most valuable assets. No two ways about it. To what use shall we put it over the next 10 years? That's both the opportunity and the responsibility before us, and all of you are really an integral part of that. So that's part of what I actually have 3 topics that I want to talk about. Let me just say a bit about John's eye-opening talk, right? The secret sauce of Homo sapiens, the storytelling that creates community, right? These bridging stories, that category of stories. So I'm outside of my script here, but I want to tell a story inspired by you, John, and what a remarkable colleague you've been for so long, and I look forward to getting to know you better. This is a story that someone just recently told me, and I thought, I need to tell that story. So I apologize for leaving my notes, but here we go. This story actually comes from the graduation remarks from one of our undergraduates who just finished. So this is a transcript from our College of Natural Resources, our Rausser College of Natural Resources, an undergraduate. And I'm just going to read some of the words that she spoke less than 2 months ago. Her name is Shreya Chowdhury. I don't know Shreya. Here we go. Let me tell you a story that, to me, is Berkeley. Last summer, I found myself in a remote rural village in Assam, India, while conducting my thesis research on my family's tea farm. One afternoon, I sat beside a tea bush, notebook in hand, listening to the stories of Parvati Mashi, an elder with hands rooted in the soil and decades of wisdom folded into her face. She asked me where I studied. When I said Berkeley, Mashi leaned in and said, with a knowing smile, Berkeley, that's where people go to change the world, no? The way her eyes sparkled and her voice swelled with recognition, that moment captured the soul of Berkeley more than any ranking ever could. Because Berkeley isn't just a name, it's a promise. It's the idea that no matter where you come from, you can shape what comes next. How is that? Go Bears. That is good stuff. That is good stuff. So there are 3 things that I'd like to talk to you about here today. Thanks again, John, for your wonderful comments. There's 3 categories of things, and I'll move through them relatively quickly. We'll have time for Q&A. I think that'll be the most fun for you, I'm sure. But I want to talk about our students. I want to talk about athletics because that is a topic that a lot of people are thinking about. And it's also so fundamental for alumni engagement. Students, athletics, and I want to talk about research because certainly the federal environment touches on our research, but more than just our research. So we'll touch on those things, and I'm happy to kind of go where you'd like, as I said, in the Q&A. If you think back, so students, first of all, if you think back to the sort of first weeks that you were on campus, I was an undergrad, as Carl mentioned. So we have something called Golden Bear orientation. Some of you may have gone through something called CALSO, but anyways, there was kind of scattered attempt at what we often use for the modern, at least in industry word of onboarding. But how do you enculturate people? How do you connect them? As Carol Chris so wonderfully said, Berkeley's a big place. It's kind of like a city. You got to find your neighborhood, and the sooner you find it, the better, right? How do you find community at Berkeley? And so that's part of what Golden Bear orientation is. It's a 6-day whirlwind of events, and there's just so much going on. It's absolutely wonderful. There are Bay Area excursions, many, many other things, connectivity with alumni. But we've gotten much more intentional about that. This idea of pride in Berkeley. We can be proud about Berkeley without having a bunch of attitude and arrogance. I'm just convinced that that's true, of course. But that's kind of delicate. But when we think about prideful people, we don't usually think about lack of attitude or arrogance. But we have a lot to be proud about, and that's part of what this orientation is about, but not all of it. We have a set of principles of community. There are exactly 7 of them. You ought to look them up if you haven't heard about those, but Carol and many others before her and our whole community. There are things like free speech. You're familiar with them. There are things like honesty and integrity. There are things like equitable access. I'm not going to walk you through all 7, but have a look, and they're introduced to those sorts of things. There was a recent graduate named Sarah who spoke at last year's convocation. She was too shy to talk about anyone on her first day. She wore bright pink pants in hopes that someone would compliment them. Thankfully, a kind young woman did, and they became roommates. Orientation helps students, right, to connect to people, and you never quite know who you're going to connect to. I still kind of remember those orientation days. I'll bet some of you do, too. We continue to try and connect every one of them to what's going on here, to the opportunities. Berkeley, it's still a very, very big place. Learning how to navigate it is important. We have lots of new navigational tools, so students can sort of find a neighborhood or find a passion or what moves them, hopefully a little bit more efficiently even than we were all here. There's a new program called the Berkeley Changemaker Program, for example, that is now some 40 courses. There are many, many programs. I don't mean to isolate this because it's so much special relative to the rest of it. But, the word changemaker, we're not the first to use the word changemaker, but you put the word Berkeley in front of it, it's like, no better place than Berkeley. And I mean no disrespect in doing this, but I'm just going to imagine I said, all right, does any one of these 5 things pop? Harvard changemaker, Princeton changemaker, MIT changemaker, Stanford changemaker, Berkeley changemaker. And yeah, I think so. So anyways, part of what I'm super interested in is what makes this place so different. There are so many values in parts of Berkeley where it's like, there are a lot of unobjectionable, wonderful values where institutions say, yeah, we're all about X. It's like, yeah, everybody says they're about X. Tell me something that other people aren't saying. So when Carol Chris stands up, or I stand up, or any of our former chancellors stands up and says, one of the things that Berkeley's is like in our DNA, this idea of questioning the status quo, there's got to be a better way to do this. I promise you, there are just a lot of wonderful private schools where the president is never going to stand up and say, we're all about questioning the status quo. That's not just another unobjectionable value. And people who hunger to find a better way to do this, which is really what we mean by that, that's a really valuable person. And that's not one-to-one with intelligence. I know a lot of people who are super intelligent that don't naturally think there's got to be a better way to do this. Anyways, there's so much going on the student front. I want to also talk about some spaces. I'm still in the student category. The homecoming, October 3rd through 5th. Hopefully you can be here. There are tours of a lot of new buildings. If you've walked around campus, you've seen a lot of wonderful new buildings. We have a new disabled students program building that's just right on the other side of Strawberry Creek right over here. completely redone. The Grimes Engineering Building, which is over at Engineering, the new Gateway Building. The undergraduate academic building is almost done. If you've been walking around, just downhill from Dwinell there. Moffett Library's completely being redone. People's Park, not everybody's favorite project, but People's Park is, if you haven't walked by People's Park, it's many stories high now. Chemistry, the Hethcock building. Okay, there is a lot going on, and our students are excited, and we are keeping a focus on students. That's really important. Let me turn to athletics, which obviously connects to students as well. Look, there's so much going on here. We started last year, just to give you some frame on this. How are we going to keep athletics sort of serving the mission of the university? I think that's the right question. I mean, if you see me investing in athletics in ways that are very clearly in your mind counter to advancing the mission of the university, it's sort of like you should give me that feedback. I think this is a good point of discussion. Alumni engagement is absolutely fundamental to our mission. There's no question about it. You give our students internships, you send students to this place as applicants, you teach our courses, you give guest lectures, oh yeah, the capital campaign, all of that. And one of the biggest, and for many people, the biggest by far driver of alumni engagement is athletics. Not just football, but athletics generally. So when we invest in athletics, you can think about that as an investment in alumni engagement, which is a driver of our mission. Now, reasonable people can say, I think we're investing too much in athletics, given how much benefit we get in terms of the mission. But that's a really important frame, I think, a kind of three-dimensional frame for thinking about what's happening. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of the House settlement and, universities actually providing income to athletes. If there are questions about that, I'd be happy to take them. But we started this year with 0 of our so we have 30 varsity sports. The 3 that are considered revenue-generating sports are football, men's basketball, and women's basketball. The other 27, part of what we're trying to do is to get them fully endowed. And by fully endowed, that's basically taking all the direct costs, the coaches, the travel, the scholarships, and getting that endowed so that it is actually funded going forward for the long term. We started last academic year, the year that just ended, with 0 of our, we call those Olympic sports, the non-revenue generating sports. 0 of them were fully endowed. At the end of last academic year, i.e. as of 3 weeks ago, we have 5 of them fully endowed. And that's a very exciting thing for us. It's women's golf, men's swimming and diving, men's water polo, and also rugby. So we think we can knock off 3 more every year for the next 3 years. That would add 9 more to 5. That's 14 out of 27. And we'd be on a fundamentally different path. When you start thinking about, though, the Carol and Ned Speaker, this wonderful transformational gift, 2 of those 5 came directly from a very recent gift. The men's and women's golf was a single gift. Anonymous, but a remarkable gift. So that's really putting a wonderful kind of frame on our ability to compete. We're part of the Atlantic Coast Conference. If you want to talk about that, what are we doing on house settlements and so forth? But the important thing, I think, is this idea that the student athletes, like the Cameron Institute, if you're following athletics at all, we use the word student athlete, but it's like, well, what do you really mean by student athlete? And we have a student athlete study center, and it's really big, and it's really important, and we invest a lot in it. And we have a Cameron Institute that's trying to develop the whole student athlete, not just performance on the field or in the pool, but performance in life. And we didn't used to have all of those assets, and that comes thanks to you and other of our alums, really important. So I just wanted to touch on athletics, however briefly. It may not be your cup of tea, but as a former undergrad here, I grew up with that, and I think a lot of the students, not all of them, but there is a segment of students who want to be part of a university with strong athletics. Doesn't have to be the top of the national ranking every year, but many people want to see us excellent across the board. Okay, a few comments on research, and then I'll turn it back to Carl for Q&A. The Trump administration is, as you know, addressing higher education in unprecedented ways. I don't need to tell you that. We're all reading about it. We all read, 2 days ago about the Columbia Agreement. We've been reading about Harvard. There were exactly 6 out of the 8 of the Ivy League schools that received, quote unquote, a Columbia letter, some letter that basically said, here's a fine and we need to negotiate what we're going to do next. How many of Berkeley's, so we have not received such a letter. I did, you may know, testify in front of the House Education and Workforce Committee about 2 weeks ago. If you want to talk about that, I'm happy to talk about that. One of the things that has happened is that we've had a lot of grants terminated, but we're not alone. How many grants have been terminated? I'm going to use round numbers. It's about 100 grants that have been, these are research grants that have been terminated. About 50 of them, about half of them have been reinstated. So we've pushed back legally. And if somebody said, well, what are we doing? There are 3 categories of action. One of the categories of action is part of what got those grants reinstated. I'll call it legal response. What kind of legal remedies are we? And mostly it's the whole UC system. So Berkeley doesn't have its own legal strategy to try and protect the research and the teaching enterprise. We are operating as a 10-campus system. So there's a set of legal strategies that we're up to. A second category of action is financial buffers. Right? Sort of like, all right, so grants have been terminated. Are those faculty just in trouble? Are those labs done? Are the graduate students, postdocs that were connected to those labs done? Is there nothing left? And so, I promise you this. We are going to conduct Berkeley in a way consistent with its values. I promise you that. So when people talk about, oh my gosh, you gave up academic freedom, you gave up this. I mean, somebody said to me recently, a senior staff member here at Berkeley, said, look how much pride in Columbia has been destroyed. I do not want to be the chancellor that destroys pride in UC Berkeley or the University of California. So I'll say that, and you can hold me to that. So part of that is okay, you said that. Those are big words. It's sort of like we got these legal remedies. They might not work. What happens if you do get a giant penalty? You can't say, oops, we don't have any buffer. So the second category is financial buffers. And if somebody said to me, Rich, can you come up, I'm just picking a number, can you come up with $200 million? That was roughly the settlement with Columbia. Not because we're necessarily going to get a letter, but terminated grants and things like that. $200 million whenever you want to? Absolutely not. I can't. In a 100-year flood? I can. In a 100-year flood, there are people like you that are willing to help us. There are ways to access capital. We can actually take loans. You could do a lot. If it's survival time, all of a sudden now it's sort of like, yes, we can put together a financial response that doesn't mean you go to your knees right now. And that's important. It's important for me to be able to credibly say we're going to live consistently with our values. All right. The third part is teaming up. Universities getting picked off one by one, that is not the optimal strategy for universities. So we are a 10-campus system, as I mentioned, in most of our legal work. And we are the AAU, the Association of American Universities. That's a 70 top research universities. And there are many other associations and coalitions of people, and we're working on that stuff. So that's kind of a very quick federal side of things. Let me also say, are we just playing defense and not listening? No. We are not. Let me give you an example. The AAU, the Association of American Universities, top 70 research universities, we meet in Washington, D.C. every 3 months, and probably 60 of the 70 presidents are in the room at the same time. And they often bring in Republican legislators to give it to us straight between the eyes. It's like, how are you thinking? And I won't mention which one, it doesn't really matter. But a very, very sensible, smart, respected Republican legislator, a senator from a southern state, one of the things he said is, you, meaning you universities, you are not pro-America enough. And it's sort of like, well, first of all, one of the things I've learned is there are only 2 good words in response to feedback, and that is thank you, actually. Not because I necessarily agree with it, but it's sort of like, please know the context. Please understand where people like me are thinking about this. Now, why is that relevant here? And I mentioned, because we're listening. I promise we're listening. All right. So So I'm an economist. Well, I talk about startups all the time. But I rarely use the phrase national competitiveness. I think we need to get over that. That's what a lot of people need to hear more of from Berkeley. Now, that may not be at all sensitive to you, and what I'm about to say may be more sensitive to you, but I'll say it anyway. If you look at chemistry and material science and physics and engineering, like how do we keep people alive in extreme situations, or aeronautics, or there's so many of our technologies are de facto what are called dual-use technologies. They contribute to national security. Berkeley's been very uncomfortable historically talking about its contributions to national security. I think we need to adjust. I'm not saying we're going to adjust the research we're doing. I think we need, if we want to be heard by half of this country, then thinking a little bit about how we do indeed contribute to national security is not something we should feel shameful about. Now, we may disagree about that, but that's this idea. Also, I think there's been too little viewpoint diversity on the Berkeley campus. So there's another thing we may disagree or agree about. But students are saying, I felt uncomfortable voicing my views in that class. That's not what Clark Kerr was talking about when he said, our job is not to make ideas safe for students. Our job is to make students safe for ideas. And if people aren't able to talk about that in class, so the idea that we are just protecting and not listening, that's not where we are. That said, we have some protecting to do. Last comment, and then I'll turn it back to Carl. KJ, baby KJ. You probably read the article, right? It was in the New York Times. It was in a lot of other places. Applied CRISPR. This was a baby in its first months who had a genetic defect. It happened to be a single gene, which makes this very workable, but a genetic defect that prevented it, it's a very rare disease, from being able to metabolize, digest protein. And this baby was not going to make it. It was in trouble. And our Innovative Genomics Institute, Jennifer Doudna, a whole team of people, also with the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia and other institutions, Danaher Corporation, they pulled together industry, hospitals, best science, but it's applied CRISPR. It's CRISPR getting it, and they had to get a special approval from the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and within 6 or 7 months, that baby was restored. That baby was, for all intents and purposes, completely healthy now, and that baby wouldn't have had a chance. Now, if you say, well, how do we do that at scale? That's the right question. Actually, a $20 million gift just came in. I don't know if we've announced this yet, where somebody read that story and said, let's try and do more of those, right? Because it's true, thinking as an economist, it's sort of like, well, how much did that cost, right? But at some level, it's sort of like, yeah, the very first time you do anything, it's not very efficient, it's very costly. But if we can figure out how to do it at scale, and we are figuring it out in disease after disease and application after application. So, Jennifer and her co-author won the Nobel Prize in biochemistry in 2020. It took only 6 or 7 months to move from a diagnosis to treatment. This is a new era in applied science. It's very exciting. So the research we do really, really matters. We are doing everything we can to protect the research enterprise because it is under threat in a lot of ways, as you know. And I'm doing everything I can in conjunction with you to live fully in accord with our mission and our values. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. And so now we're going to open the floor for questions. Do we have any questions? Okay. Oops. I'll grab this one here. Okay. So this is about your testimony before the Congressional Committee.
Yes.
What was it like testifying before a hostile Congressional Committee?
Yeah, it wasn't pleasant. I'll start there. So this is the Education and Workforce Committee of the House of Representatives. There have been 5 or 6, maybe 7 of these hearings, focused on anti-Semitism, I should say. That was the focus of the session. The very first of these, you may remember the name Claudine Gay. At the time, she was the president of Harvard University, and Liz McGill was the president of Penn. And they both lost their jobs as a result of what they said at this very hearing, right, the very setting. So it is a very complicated situation. Not everybody needs to have the same political views in this room, but it's a combative environment there. And part of what I was coached to do is, look, you are not there. So by the way, the university, the whole UC system, among other people on the senior staff, I mean, they coached me like crazy, because it's sort of like, you don't walk into this not being prepared, and you don't quite know what's going to happen. But part of the preparation was, I remember people saying to me, you are not there to score points. Lots of academics like to score points, intellectually. It's like, if you're going to say that, boom, I'm going to say this. Anyways, you're not there to score points. You're not there to win. You shouldn't fold. You shouldn't say anything you're going to regret. But understand what you're up against. And basically, my word, not there, is like, stay zen, stay centered. Don't get riled. And so that's sort of where I started. We got some complicated questions. I'm happy to talk about the details. But bottom line is, another goal people said is, basically, 2 weeks later, nobody's talking about it. I realize we're 2 weeks later and we're still talking about it. But I think that's, there's downside risk and like no upside potential. Now, I did put out, each of us, there were 3 panelists the day that I presented. One was from the City University of New York, president of the whole CUNY system, and also Georgetown. And each of us got to do a personal statement, an opening statement. They were supposed to be 3 minutes long. They're roughly 3 minutes long. If you want to see that opening statement, including, the actual video of it, we've got it up on our website, and it's obviously readable. That was the one place where you can put in some things that a lot of people will read and sort of tell Berkeley's story. But Berkeley unequivocally condemns anti-Semitism. And I talked a lot about our anti-Semitism education initiative and many, many other things. But a lot of this was sparked by encampments and other things in the year prior to my starting. And those were some of the topics that were getting addressed in this session. So I think I'll stop there. Thanks for the question.
Okay, next question. Why does the university get so little publicity concerning all of the wonderful work occurring at Berkeley, i.e. no publicity about the men's swimming team taking second at the NCAAs and winning it, and then 2 years ago winning it?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good question and point. I take it as effectively a point, not just around athletics, but Berkeley's comprehensive excellence more generally, right? I mean, you don't have to raise your hands, but how many of you know somebody, I certainly do, or somebody in your family, or you yourself, who's been treated with an immunotherapy approach to cancer? And that's a lot of people. That came from here. That was Jim Allison's work. I got to see the invention disclosure form when he first wrote on it. It was handwritten. He said, these are the results I'm excited about. He ended up winning a Nobel Prize for that work. But that led to a sort of fourth pillar in cancer therapy. I'm using that as an example. There's so many examples. And so I think the quick answer is, Berkeley hasn't invested as much as a lot of other universities, especially wealthier privates, in communications per se. I think we have an opportunity to shift that. Like, for example, if you go back at our last strategic plan, it's up on our website, it's excellent. If you go back at our last capital campaign plan, was there a communications pillar? Were there any gifts or strategic vectors that were really about communicating our story differently? The answer is no. We got a gift, it was about a year and a half ago now, that was unlike any gift we'd ever received before, at least to my knowledge. And this was a lovely gift. It was $1 million gift, but it was a different category. And this donor said, so Berkeley now ranks, this was actually in my personal statement that I sent to Congress. It was that sort of one opportunity to say something that people might not know. Berkeley's undergrads, our undergraduate alumni, produce more funded new businesses, or if you want the jargon, venture-funded startups, than the undergraduates of any university in the country. Number one, by far. And number two, you're going to guess who it is like 20% behind us. And people know we're good at that, but they don't know how good we're at that. Okay, why am I bringing this up? This donor said, here's $1 million. I want to work with you to invest it solely in telling Berkeley's story more powerfully externally around innovation and entrepreneurship. And within the next month, just as one small example, a new book will publish. And the title of the book is Startup University. And it's about how did Berkeley over the last 20 years become the best in the country at producing funded new businesses. And it's story after story after story. And that's just one little piece of telling a story in new ways. So somebody said, oh, you spent $1 million, or we spent $1 million on Google AdWords. It's like, no, no, no. When a gift like that comes in, people start saying, we could write a book. We could do this, we could do that. It's just amazing, the communications creativity that gets triggered by a gift like that. So I think I'm agreeing with the premise of the question, and I'm also saying I'm very interested in telling our story. And I think there's a kind of humility factor, a kind of confidence without attitude factor that I value very highly about Berkeley. But I think we need to get a little more assertive in telling our story. So we're going to do more of that.
Okay, here's a question about student support. So it says, many first-generation college students are able to come because of Pell Grants, which are under threat. What plans does UC Berkeley have to address this problem?
Well, it is a fundamental problem. It looks like the most recent versions of the bill, Pell funding is under threat if you have sort of full funding from other sources, a grant or some other thing. So the whole Pell program isn't going away, but that's still a threat. It's still an important thing because that they were available if you came from a particular income category in the past, no matter how much other funding you were getting. Look, we're thinking equitable access. I mentioned it. That's one of our 7 principles of community. It's fundamental to what Berkeley is. One of the areas that we're thinking about strategic opportunity is around economic mobility. We may have a pillar in our next strategic plan. It's like Berkeley's really good at economic mobility at scale, and we're going to get a lot better at it. And here are 10 things we're going to do to make sure that we can drive as much upward mobility as we possibly can. I find that a really interesting narrative. Now, we can't not think about this and be doing that. So, the help that many of you already provide in funding students who would be underfunded or wouldn't have access to the university. We are thinking hard about how we can provide, well, I'll give you one other small example. Often we think about Pell and students that are matriculating. I asked UC Berkeley Extension. One of the things that you hear in Congress, for example, I mentioned that, you're not pro-America enough comment. But one of the comments, it's sort of like, and it's not asked this way, but if somebody says, what are you doing to help the people who don't need or want or can't afford a 4-year degree? What are you doing for them? And I was talking to Rick Russo, who's the dean who runs UC Berkeley Extension. I said, how many people do you serve every year in University Extension? Not our degree programs, 17,000. We got a new $14 million gift a couple years ago to create a scholarship program inside UC Berkeley Extension, not in one of our degree programs, for people to get a Berkeley credential in something that doesn't require a 4-year degree, like project management or data analytics or healthcare services of this type or the other. And the idea is you will have an interview at the end of this program, and it's paid for. It's called the UC Accelerator Program, EXC. Anyways, it's sort of like, that's interesting. So I think, the Pell Grant is a degree program question, and the way I'd like to think about that is in the large. Let's go after economic mobility, or let's think about what doubling down on that would look like. And obviously finding funding, even if it's not going to be Pell, to do that is essential. But I think we can also think more widely. How are we serving people? How is Berkeley serving people who don't have the opportunity or the interest in coming to Berkeley? I think that's a really interesting strategic question.
Last question. And this has to do about Berkeley's rankings. how do we get even more grad programs into the top 10 or at least the top 25?
Well, sometimes I talk today about how startups and so forth. Some of you know that I come from the business school. The root source of Berkeley's preeminence is fundamental research. It is. We are great at education. We are great at public service. We are great at translational research. But the whole world knows us because we have people doing real discovery and defining the frontiers of field after field after field. That's why the whole world knows us. And I take this to sort of be that point. Most of our, we talk about graduates or undergraduates. It's sort of like the PhDs that are coming out of Berkeley that are populating these other great universities. It's stunning how many presidents of other universities got their PhD here. I mean, Berkeley really does connect to higher ed in a really big way. And so when we talk about graduate programs, most people think first PhDs, and it's really a fundamental part of how we do all that fundamental research. So I think the quick answer to that is if I forget, or I take actions that are inconsistent with the idea that the root source of Berkeley's preeminence is fundamental research, you should call me out on it. So, for example, when we're doing, campus renewal, what we used to call deferred maintenance, sort of like, yeah, you can beautify the campus, or you can make sure that lab has what it needs, or you can make sure your humanists have what they need to do the kind of research they want to do. And those are decisions you need to make. And at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the research engine at the frontier of field after field is as far out as we can get it so that faculty do want to come here, which will ultimately drive the rankings, right? We don't do it, of course, for the rankings, but the rankings are a somewhat lagged reflection of whether you're bringing in the best doctoral students and especially whether you're bringing in and retaining the best faculty. And we just have to make sure we keep doing that. So when resource decisions get really tough, we will often hire fewer tenure-line faculty and make sure that the great ones we have are taken care of. That's a hard decision to make, right? Because it raises student-faculty ratios and things like that. But if we let the average quality of our faculty diminish, we're not Berkeley.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all. I have a few closing comments, but really want to thank you all for being here. Just going to go off script for a second. Really want to thank the team from External Relations, Marketing, and Communications for putting this program together, particularly Susan Parrish and her team. Definitely the folks from Berkeley Catering and all the other people from behind the scenes, because as you know, it's impossible to put an event on but for the people that work behind the scenes. So I want to give all of them a round of applause. So I also want to give a shout out to the UC Botanical Garden that I know many of you support. They have been an excellent partner to our office, the Office of Gift Planning. We work closely with them. And if you are not already familiar with this gym, the garden is located just a short drive from here in Strawberry Canyon. It's a living museum, a vital research hub, and an invaluable educational resource at UC Berkeley, the Bay Area, and beyond. It's the third largest botanical garden in the United States in terms of number of species, with incredibly diverse landscape containing more than 10,000 plants, including many that are rare and endangered. So I'd like to call your attention to the I'd like to call your attention that the UC Botanical Garden offers free guided tours by the garden director to any Wheeler Society member for up to 6 guests. So these tours are a delight, providing behind-the-scenes look at this impressive garden. So please contact the garden director, Mary Cardinals. I think she's in the room somewhere. If you are, can you stand up? Okay, maybe she left. And then We may have some brochures here on the garden, and if we do, please feel free, to take those and learn more about the garden. Thanks goes to John Powell. Thank you so much for being here. To Chancellor Lyons, thank you so much for being here. And to you, our essential donors, in ensuring Berkeley remains one of the world's greatest universities. I mean, this is an amazing place. I hope you leave today with new knowledge, renewed love for Berkeley, and maybe even a new friend. And one quick reminder before we leave, if you parked your car with the valet this morning, the attendants will meet you in the lower Sproul garage directly below us, and the staff will guide you to the elevators, which will take you down to the garage. So again, I'm thrilled to now announce and welcome the Cal Band to close our time together. Fia, Lex, and Go Bears.
you.